told today by someone who just picked up some padel business that the NGB actually doesn't want to be called padel anymore.
They just want to go paddle.
They want to go paddle.
Yeah, I know.
Who's making these executive decisions?
It's a very important one too, because every time I've talked to someone, including people in the know, that I've said, "Are you saying padel or paddle?" Because I've been around the world, and it's quite popular around the world, and they say it different. Oftentimes, they just say paddle.
You know what it reminds me of? When you go to a Greek restaurant and you order a gyro. Every time you order a gyro, they say gyro. Every time you say gyro, they say gyro. So no matter what I say is wrong. So whether I call it paddle or padel, I will be wrong. That's the one thing I will guarantee. Welcome to Wait What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGhee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, Tim McGhee.
And I'm David Parro.
David, what's on your mind this week?
Well, first of all, I want to wish everybody, hope that everybody had a wonderful Mother's Day for those celebrating in the United States and in Australia and Canada and Chile and Colombia and Ecuador and Peru and all the other countries that celebrate on the same time as the United States. Given our global reach, Tim, I'm thinking that we touched most of those countries. Yeah. Last check, it continued to grow. So happy Mother's Day to everybody all over that celebrated. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I do want to follow up because we've been covering it quite a bit over the last few weeks, is that the numbers continue to be strong from a viewership standpoint with the NBA, and the timing on this is just really, I think, good for them, as it looks like they're closing in on closing the Celtics sale, and then being able to talk about expansion and what those rates are. But experiencing strong viewership. We talked about the opening weekend, continue to be averaging about 5.6 million across ABC and ESPN, which is up 9%. And then one of the things that struck me was I think you'd normally look at an OKC Denver series and say, maybe not going to do all that well, even though obviously Denver has a near perennial MVP in 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝘵𝘯𝘥𝘴, Jokic, who has won 3 out of the last 4 MVPs, but he's going up against this great OKC team. It's now 2-2 based on when this is recorded in that series, and those numbers seem to be pretty strong. Now, OKC also has SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who him and the Joker are the two, I think, favorites for MVP. So they're facing off. So I think that series could go the distance and will do pretty good numbers. Again, it just strikes me as not the massive market. I mean, Denver's obviously a big market, but teams that you wouldn't normally say are going to drive big numbers. So I just think it's all setting up very, very well for the NBA here with the teams they still have, and even in the smaller markets, great stories to the series.
Yeah, I mean, talking about a smaller market, Indianapolis put a beating on Cleveland last night. Cleveland and OKC were the cream of the crop all regular season, but I think this just adds fuel to the fire that is the popular held belief that the regular season doesn't count for anything in the WNBA. This doesn't do anything to dissuade people from believing that, right? When you look at Indianapolis beating up on Cleveland so far, the Knicks still up 2-1 on the Celtics, despite the fact that they lost every game against the Celtics this past season. So it'll be interesting to see. It was the Knicks did not have another miracle comeback in Game 3 the other day, but the get-in price was $600 and tickets were up to $2,000 for that game, which is Super Bowl-like numbers. And this is conference semi. This isn't even a finals or even a conference finals. This is a semifinal.
Yeah, I was driving back into town on Saturday, and you could just feel the vibe in the city. It was an early game. It was an afternoon game in New York. And it was like you were in a smaller town. You could just feel, and that's great when it happens in New York, because New York, there's always so much going on. It's hard to penetrate that and feel kind of the super sports fandom that there is here, because there's just so much going on and so many things. But you could feel it, like driving in and around, when I was coming in from driving up from Pennsylvania and kind of driving across Manhattan, and you just see everybody out with Knicks gear, and whether they were heading actually to the game or just to get to a bar. It's cool. It almost feels like a smaller town when you get this. There is a lot of excitement. Now, there are a lot of pretty depressed people after that loss because, the Celtics did not lose during the regular season, and they certainly have the Knicks number at the Garden. And that's another thing that's interesting, and I wanted to get your view on this. Home court doesn't seem to mean that much anymore, even though you have a place like Boston, rabid fans. You have a place like the Garden, rabid fans. And it doesn't seem to have the impact. And I don't know if there is just something that players are so used to it, it doesn't get to them. But it's been surprising how many road games are being won by the visiting team.
I don't know the answer to why it happens, but at least certainly this year it seems to be happening. One of my theories is it's the whole us against the world mentality. When you go into the opposing team's arena, you feel like you've got nothing to lose, and it's you and your teammates against the world. That's one thing. I will say this: when the Celtics really took the crowd out of the game early the other day in New York, and the Knicks weren't really able to get them back in, I think that plays into it. Depends on the score and the momentum and the dynamic of the individual game, but I'm not sure why that is.
Right.
The thing is, listen, at the end of the day, the court is the same size whether you're playing in OKC or Boston or Golden State or whatever, but it's the crowd. But I don't know. But your point is well taken. It doesn't seem to be as big a factor as maybe it has been in years past.
Right. I just want to follow up on the point that Nuggets and Thunder Game 4 averaged 5.61 on TNT, which was up 19% from a comparable a year ago. That's significant. Wow. That's significant. Yeah. With one of those markets being a small market team.
Yeah, and you said it earlier, the two favorites for the MVP. I think Jokic is going to get it, but I think when you have two young stars, especially SGA, it's that's must-watch TV.
Now, here's another interesting fact: the top three, because if you add Giannis into the mix for MVP, right? Mm-hmm. All three of the top candidates, non-American.
Yeah,
pretty interesting.
Right.
What about you?
Where do we start? I guess let me start with what seems to be a recurring theme on this show, where Tim has to make a correction for something he said in a previous episode. So last week we were talking about the Indiana Fever playing the Brazilian national team in an exhibition game where, if memory serves me well, the Fever won by over 40 points. Caitlin Clark went over to the Brazilian coach, thanked the coach for bringing the team up. Very sportsman-like gesture. I mentioned in jest that the Brazilian soccer team, women's soccer team, could have done just as well as the women's basketball team. So in the midst of my joke, I mentioned that Marta, the Brazilian soccer star who plays for the Orlando Pride here in NWSL, was the wife of Breanna Stewart. That is not, in fact, correct. Breanna Stewart does have a wife named Marta, but she is a fellow WNBA player. So I apologize for the mistake. I will not apologize for the joke.
Listen, we've debated this. I think maybe within a couple episodes down the road, we'll have a new segment that we'll have to name. Maybe we effed up or something like that. We'll come up with a little theme and run it. But keep us honest, folks. So if we do, this was one that obviously Tim caught right after, and glad to make that correction.
Having said that, I want to return to what also seems to be a recurring theme on this show, the latest in the travails of Shadeur Sanders. So two things. One, there was ostensibly a Colorado University fan who has sued the NFL for $100 million, claiming emotional distress and trauma because Shadeur Sanders dropped to the 5th round. I think you mentioned before we came on the air, you asked if that person lost a bet where Shadeur Sanders would be drafted. I did not see anything that referenced that. I just think it's absolutely absurd. And this person also then wants the NFL to change its drafting process, which is just ridiculous.
Well,
But
the changing the drafting process is to keep cover for, because all they're looking for, I would venture to guess, that is money, and that is trying to add something to it to make it look a little more credible. That's how I read that.
yeah, I hope that it gets summarily dismissed and this plaintiff is required to pay the NFL's legal fees. Not that the NFL can't afford to pay their own, but there should be some discouragement of people filing frivolous lawsuits.
I hope this person's not like in massive trouble financially or otherwise. I don't wish that, and I haven't read the complaint, but this just sounds absolutely absurd, opportunistic, maybe at best.
Yeah, well, I think, the first warning bell should have been the fact that they retain Lionel Hutz as their attorney, well known from The Simpsons. But on a much nicer note about Shadeur Sanders, I did see a video clip of him the other day coming into a media availability with a bunch of reporters. And as he walked into the room, he went up to each one of them, shook their hand, introduced himself, and asked their name. And I just thought with that, with all of the things we've been hearing and reading about his performance in the meetings, I just thought that was a really good sign. And maybe somebody is speaking to him and talking to him about the importance of how he handles himself in various situations now that he's a professional football player. But I just did think it was very nice to see. And I think, too often in today's media climate, we look to find fault in people. And I think we should also point out the good.
Yep. We talked about some of the wackiness of that whole situation, from the, obviously the slipping in the draft. We made some fun about it. Obviously, we covered the prank phone call situation a bit. But we also talked about that this does have the chance to be an unbelievable story, and maybe he's on the way to paving that story.
Well, and just to, I know we don't like to talk about, the game as it's played on the field, but Derek, I do think this falls within the whole realm of sports business. Derek Carr, quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, announced his retirement because of a chronic shoulder injury, which I guess is not repairing and not healing the way he would like it to. And so there is some talk within NFL circles that the Browns will trade one of the 5 quarterbacks on their roster to the New Orleans Saints. So it remains to be seen which one of those 5 will go. I don't know the Saints quarterback situation, so I don't know if it's more likely that the Saints would want a veteran like Joe Flacco, or they would want one of the young guys.
I would have to think it is the kid out of Oregon or Pickett. Flacco, I mean, you can't be planning on Flacco being your starter, can you? Even though he's recently performed quite well.
He's certainly not the guy you want to bet your
Build.
future on, right?
Right.
Given his age. So I don't know. It's just interesting. It's just a curious situation becomes more and more curious as the days go by, as we get closer to OTAs and eventually summer camp and then preseason, regular season.
So it's Upfront week here in New York. And as I mentioned earlier, we are recording this on a Monday, a little earlier than we normally do. And NBC Universal kicked it off. And they had some news coming out. There's a couple things. And I kept thinking about the comment that you've made a few times about sports being the ultimate reality show, because we know that scripted television on broadcast network is significantly down, whereas a lot of the scripted stuff is going over to the streamers where they will spend the kind of money. And it just, made me think about how important sports still is to the overall profitability, revenue driving of all of the people involved in the upfronts. NBC Universal saying that nearly half of the upfront dollars this year are coming from sports. NBC has a big year coming up, right? Because they're coming back with the NBA and they'll have the Winter Olympics. This is upfront for going into next year. And they also announced that Michael Jordan's going to be part of the team as kind of a special contributor. And I thought that was interesting. Michael hasn't done this kind of stuff. He's been, he's done obviously ownership. He has had some, he's been criticized as an owner on the NBA side, but he seems to have found a nice place in the NASCAR world as an owner. And he's still obviously coveted. I mean, he's freaking MJ. I mean, right? He's the GOAT.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great get. I'm can't wait to see, what he does contribute.
I think his insights are going to be fantastic because he still has remained around the game. So I'm looking forward to it. But to your point earlier about NBC getting 50% of its ad revenue from sports, I mean, they have the Winter Games in Milano Cortina, which start in February. And just before that, they have the Super Bowl from Levi Stadium in Santa Clara. So not surprising that they're getting that big of a chunk of their ad revenue from sports. But even with the Winter Games never coming close to approaching ratings of summer games, it's still a ton of ad inventory that they're going to be selling. And the fact that they're going to be able to promote it during the Super Bowl should help viewership as well.
Right. Barkley, Kenny Smith, they can be pretty tough on players. I can't imagine what Jordan, no, I don't think Jordan thinks anyone's that good.
Well, yeah, he's not been a coach. He's been an owner. But the person he most reminds me of, and I was too young to see him as a player, but he had a stint as a manager, and then in later life, he was very curmudgeonly, was Ted Williams, right? Ted Williams could never understand why people couldn't do what he did. Right. And Michael Jordan's similar. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I have a question for you. Have you heard what ESPN is planning to name its new direct-to-consumer offering?
I have not.
ESPN. Speaking of, ESPN has announced that Chris Berman is staying on for another stint, at least through the.
Do we get a raise for that guy who came up with that name? For ESPN?
Yeah. That's what I heard. Anyway, that's what I read. I read that today, and I just got a chuckle out of it. I thought I had to say it. At least it's not ESPN Plus, which obviously they've already used, and everybody else does Plus. So I give them. I guess that's a more creative offering than just going back with a revamped ESPN Plus.
Well, we joke, but in my mind, what that speaks to is the fact that eventually, it could be 5 years, could be 10 years down the line, you will be consuming ESPN strictly and solely through that direct-to-consumer offering.
Tim, that's exactly why they did it. There's no doubt in my mind that's exactly why they did it. So I think you're totally right on that.
So why change the name if that's where, they're skating to where the puck's going to be?
I'm not questioning. Yes, absolutely. Another a great analogy there. I'm joking about it because it's kind of funny that they're announcing that their new DTC is ESPN. I think it's actually absolutely the smart play, and we'll give them credit. And you're right, because there's going to be a blend of all this stuff, and it's just ESPN.
All right. I think we got one more time for one more quick hit.
Sure.
All right. Formula One, where you spent much of your last few years, recently announced earnings. Their net profit went from 136 million to a loss of 28 million. Revenue was down 27% to $403 million. And the viewership of the Miami Grand Prix was down 32%. Now, in a world where you and I talk about 2% drops in NBA viewership and wonder how that bodes for the future of the league, these numbers can't be ignored.
Correct.
And I'm not predicting the demise of Formula One, but that is, if I'm the owners of Formula One, I've got to be concerned. Now, they did say that they've got 14 billion with a B dollars booked in future revenue. They've got the new media rights deal coming up. But if you're Jimmy Pitaro, Mark Lazarus, whoever, you have to think, is this property still on a growth trajectory here in the United States, or has it plateaued?
Yeah, in addition to that, the launch of this past season, meaning one of the problems, by the way, with Drive to Survive is that it's looking at the season in arrears, right? It covers this season was covering last season. And I think that worked for a while. And those numbers have slowed down in terms of the number of total views right out of the box. I mean, and that's despite my very unbelievable cameo in episode 9 of this season. So I do think they have some things to worry about. It does put a lot of pressure on this new U.S. deal that will be coming up. I continue to believe that a streamer play makes sense to go a very different route. And I think Netflix would be the right play, Apple a possibility, possibly in conjunction with, say, an NBC. I don't think Fox is going to come after it. And they are going to have some problems with getting the number they want, which is more than double what they're getting right now from the ESPN deal. Now, ESPN says it's not totally out. But I think they will still be out. So yeah, I think they do have some things to work on. They're going to have to continue to lean on where they've been strong, because they have been strong on the sponsorship side. They've announced some unbelievable, great both America's sponsors and global partners of late, and they're fetching a pretty big number for those deals. Those are league-wide deals. And I've talked to people on the team side lately, and they're saying the conversations they're having have not slipped at all, that they're getting people coming in and wanting to talk. So sponsorship-wise, people still like what F1 represents, and that's a strength. And they tend to be very strong on the social engagement side, which is what Drive to Survive helped really spawn, as people found it a lifestyle sport. But they definitely are going to have to look at these numbers from a television standpoint, and not just in the United States, but around the world. And are they driving people to it, or are people watching in different ways? So I think you're right that it's nothing that can be ignored. But they do have some other things, I think, to draw on. And so when you look at the U.S. market, NASCAR continues from a motorsport standpoint still to beat it. When they go head-to-head, certainly it beats it. They fetch a little over 3 or in the 3s every race, whereas F1 is under 2. They're both are beating IndyCar significantly. IndyCar came out of the box very strong this year. With the new Fox partnership, that seems to have dipped a bit. They have a bit of a Max Verstappen problem, it seems, right now, with Alex Palou winning, it seems, almost every week or finishing high. So that'll be interesting to watch how they do comparatively. And I'm not saying that's the most important thing. They have to look at their own numbers and deal with those issues that they have. But yeah, there could be a little bit of a stagnation there. I imagine the folks at Liberty Media are looking at that quite closely.
What do you say? We take a break?
Let's do it.
We've got a great guest coming up.
It's time for our guest.
We are back, and we are so happy to welcome our next guest. He is the first repeat guest in the history of Wait What. Terry Lefton, the editor-at-large at Sports Business Journal. You have either spoken to him, read him, or laughed at one of his jokes making fun of Dallas Cowboys fans. But Terry, welcome back to the show.
So happy to be here. I don't know what it means that I'm the first return guest. Maybe it means that you ran out of people in your, no one will know what this means, Rolodex.
No. we actually get pitched quite often on bringing on guests, and we are very discriminating on who we allow on the show.
Yeah, we're starting to feel.
Okay.
Yeah, we're starting to feel a little like you, and with the
PR
pitches
people
that we're getting. Yeah.
So Terry, let's start with as broad a question as we possibly can. What sponsorship story in the world of sports has really wowed you over the last year or so?
I've been doing this for long enough that I don't get wowed that easily, or perhaps at all. Having said that, gentlemen, I am mightily impressed, somewhere to beyond maybe shocked, at the success that UFC has been having in not only selling sponsorships, but sponsorships for a lot of money and to big names. I wish I had some personal affinity for the sport. I'm sure I could get really good seats if I really wanted. I have none, but I am terrifically impressed by the things they've been doing. The till just keeps going up. This was a sport that historically had not been able to attract many sponsors, many mainstream sponsors, many premier sponsors. And in the last little while, I've seen them knock down one after another that each one was the biggest in their history. First, AB and Bud Light came back after a hiatus. That was their biggest. Then I think it was Verizon came back. That was their biggest. Meta came back. That was by far their biggest. They just keep getting more and more people knocking down the doors. And I think it's a good lesson. And what are sponsors usually chasing, even in these days where everyone likes to talk about women's sports ad nauseum? It's young male, right? It's 18 to 30 male, somewhere in there, because they're famously elusive, right? So we know it delivers them, and they just keep knocking down sponsors. I mean, they haven't gotten some real obvious ones yet. I expect them to. I expect them to have a big car deal pretty soon. I expect them to have a big QSR deal pretty soon. That's really impressed me. And then the larger parent company, TKO, also owns WWE, which is interesting because some of the same people selling, but they're really different properties. First of all, one's scripted and one's not. So one's sports and one's not. One has more ads than you could possibly imagine on the field of play, that being the Octagon in the case of the UFC. And the other, WWE, just started putting branding on their canvas. So it's interesting. But UFC to me is really one of the most impressive things. And as I said, I have no personal affinity for the sport, so it's all business.
Yeah, you're right. Obviously, MMA is a lot more mainstream now, and you have media personalities the size of, say, a Rogan, who's actively involved in it as well. So it seems like the timing is right, and yeah, it is the time for that audience, right?
I mean, who thought they would knock down IBM? IBM's got what, the Masters and Ferrari and UFC.
Masters and Ferrari.
Like, okay. But it's working for them because, they deliver an audience, and, sports well run and everything else. And they seem to be able to, I mean, they're in the event business every other weekend or so. They seem to have a big event, and the names seem to cycle through there. They don't seem to last that long, but even so, they seem to generate events and big money. And I'm very impressed by what they're doing. And they've got a big upside, probably bigger than the other huge properties, because they're not as mature.
Yeah, it feels a little to me like back to the time when NASCAR was really starting to go so mainstream, and it started just fetching these consumer brands and other brands that were looking and just said, we just got to get this audience. It's not a matter of whether it's a rough and tumble sport or we don't think it's our vision of what All American is. It's just the reality is the numbers were there of the right type of people.
These things often start with regularly scheduled viewing time. So sure enough, I think it was 2018, ESPN signed and then renewed. They were on ESPN. But suddenly ESPN is covering UFC for one, but also you knew when and where to watch them. And after that, they started knocking down all these sponsorships. And I'm completely impressed by what they've done.
Yeah, another analogy would be gaming and esports, right? That, probably only other way besides MMA and esports to get that young male would be to buy advertising on young females. So, that's.
I think there's a business there for you.
There you go, Tim.
Wearable.
So you've been covering the sports business for quite a while. Would you be able to characterize in any way how the covering of the business has changed since you started?
The covering or the business itself?
Well,
the covering, there's more of it. I mean, I used to be the only person, right? So now we've got some supposed competition. I don't take them too seriously when it comes to the marketing side of things.
How has the business changed to the way you're looking at it and what you're trying to gather from it in terms, because it's grown, it's expanded, it's obviously more.
I'd say overall in my career, there's the X and the Y axis, right? Here's the axis with the number of journalists, real ones, is kind of, this way, and the number of PR people is kind of this way, which is not a healthy mix. But obviously, the money involved is way up. You get money involved, you're going to get a lot more people trying to get more attention, and it's show business, so they want to get it out there. In terms of coverage, it's right. I mean, there's more people doing what I do. Before me, I guess there were people just covering a media beat. Now there's all kinds of specific beats. We have people covering colleges, media, digital. It's very specialized now, and that's a sign of a mature business, I guess.
Let's take a look at trends that you have seen developing over the last few years. And when I say trends, we can also look at fads, right? Which are not, by definition, not long lasting, but trends and fads. What have you seen that you like, trends that you thought, wow, this is taking the business in a new positive direction, and trends that you look at and say, oh my goodness, what is happening here?
Well, my grandfather and my father both had an ad agency, and they both used to talk about ROI, and they both used to cite John Wanamaker, another famous Philly guy, by the way, who said, half of my ad budget's wasted. I don't know which half. It's probably the most famous saying in advertising, right? We have seen across business per se, and even on the field stuff, more emphasis on metrics and analytics. I'm not sure there's a silver bullet yet, but I think if we're just concentrating and focusing on that direction and thinking about return on investment before you make the sponsorship investment, it's a healthy thing. I still see things that are done by Execuim every week. I still see properties being bought, then the sponsor afterwards figures out what to do with them. And usually when they get an agency in that case, the first thing they figure out is, oh, we overpaid by 4X. That or us. So that's one of the larger ones, I think. Overall, I would tell you that, the business has shifted from when I started. It was about the tickets and signage. And there's still a lot of tickets and signage in there, but now it's about customized digital and social content and all those other things connected to the internet. Because, I think we've learned by now, if nothing else, the internet changes everything. Sports exploded in the 80s with the explosion of cable TV, which is interesting because now we're seeing, wait, is cable TV going to be around much longer? Is everything going to shift to streaming? And oh, by the way, if you look just to the linear side, sports is pretty much what's keeping linear TV alive. So those are all interesting, and those things weren't true. I mean, just media fragmentation per se. It's something someone in the business has to deal with every day. And RSNs, especially for some baseball and some of the arena sports, the money they were getting from those deals is often their top or second biggest revenue stream. Now it looks like it might dry up. And how do you replace those? If everything goes to streaming, especially, how do you replace those? And then in some cases, we've gone back to the future. The teams have reverted to free over-the-air broadcast when they were on cable for decades. So all that's kind of interesting, figuring out what that transition is going to be. A lot of the really big cable systems, and I'm not the biggest expert on this, but I know something about it because it's related. A lot of the bigger cable systems, 70 or 80% of their revenue is supplied by sub fees. Well, okay, if the sub fees go away, you're not replacing 70 or 80% of your revenue. So how do you replace all that? I think it sort of speaks to everything's going to be DTC at some point, doesn't it?
I think absolutely that is the direction it's going. The question is who's controlling that?
Right.
Is there going to be enough momentum on the local DTC side, which we've seen some success on the NHL side and the NBA side there, and what does that mean for, say, the NBA doing a national DTC deal similar to what MLS has on the RSN side, or on what would have been the RSN side? So I agree with you. This is such a fascinating thing to watch. And I mean, listen, so much of this feels like it's been a little kind of defying gravity, but the numbers continue to be okay. I think, fortunately, to keep that ecosystem a little bit propped up.
But I'm always looking for the friction, but especially between local and national. Now, imagine, even if the numbers start to make sense to you when you're looking at a DTC package, you're looking, okay, this was my number one or number two revenue team, me, Mr. Team, and now you, the league, are taking it over. That's not going to be easy in any case, even if the numbers are better.
And not every league is the NFL, so it's a little. So you talked
They all
about
have their problems, David.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about the UFC and I think highlighted them very appropriately. Any other properties stand out to you in terms of the way they're attracting or working with their sponsors?
I think that's so highly dependent on category, sponsor, or agency, how important you are on any of those lists. So I don't think there's any one. If you ask me, we often get this question about, what property you would invest in if it were a stock.
Yeah.
And I might put some money behind rugby. They're going to have the World Cup here before long. And World Cup rugby is huge everywhere but here, I think, right? I'm safe in saying that. So, it's the smaller version. The larger one is a little too confusing for Americans. I think there's too many bodies on the court. But I think that's what I'd look at. All the racket sports are doing pretty well right now. I don't know if that means they're going to come back. I get hit with a pickleball pitch about once an hour, and I do believe in it as a participatory sport. I think it's been the fastest growing every year for 5 or 6 years. But do I believe in it as a spectator sport? No, I don't think it's that great a sport to watch. It's fine to play. I've done some, and I think that's where the money is in that sport, if there's any, is building more pickleball facilities. I don't necessarily think it's a great sport to watch on TV or to go see.
David, I did not feed this
No.
response to Terry.
I think he's just endorsing the DP and McGhee consistent language on pickleball.
Same opinion on your side.
Yeah. We've said
absolutely.
it. We haven't knocked it from a participation standpoint, other than the obnoxiousness of the noise, the racket, hitting.
Yes,
the
there's
ball,
some people that drives crazy.
drives me crazy. We had Kevin Klipstein on last week, actually, president and CEO of US Squash, and he talked about some of these facilities going up that are pickleball, padel, and squash that seem to have some promise to play these kind of compact things. I don't know what that's going to do for tennis, and I happen to be a tennis fan myself, but yeah, no, we've been consistent with where you went on the pickleball side, but it's great, people being active and all that. Nothing wrong with that.
I was told today by someone who just picked up some padel business that the NGB actually doesn't want to be called padel anymore.
They just want to go paddle.
They want to go paddle.
Yeah, I know.
Who's making these executive decisions?
It's a very important one too, because every time I've talked to someone, including people in the know, that I've said, are you saying padel or paddle? Because I've been around the world, and it's quite popular around the world, and they say it different. Oftentimes they just say paddle. Kevin Klipstein, last week's guest, he said it two ways, I think, during our discussion.
You know what it reminds me of? When you go to a Greek restaurant and you order a gyro. Every time you order a gyro, they say gyro. Every time you say gyro, they say gyro. So no matter what I say is wrong. So whether I call it paddle or padel, I will be wrong. That's the one thing I will guarantee.
These are trivial enough matters that I will find a way to write a column about it someday.
We are all around the same age. We all grew up, you two in Philadelphia, me in the New York metropolitan area, not too far from one another. When we were young, racquetball was the sort of go-to racket sport for participation. Do you know anybody who plays racquetball? I don't.
Only because I live about, I'd say, 5 minutes or less walk from a racquetball, 2 racquetball courts in a park in Greenwich. So they still play it here, but they're building I don't think they're building any new ones. They're building pickleball courts.
Yeah, I think the squash people finally had enough and made sure they put racquetball out of its. Just put it down. They just put it down.
Well, but reference your earlier comment about the noise that drives people crazy in pickle. I've started to get pitches recently about quiet pickleball equipment. Now, there were too many pickleball equipment manufacturers 4 years ago. Now there's going to be more of these quiet balls and rackets that supposedly hit the ball and make less of a noise. So this is a growing market, apparently.
It's like hitting a wiffle ball with a frying pan. That's how I describe pickleball. But we digress.
Yes.
You also cover licensing for the Sports Business Journal.
Mhm.
I want to ask you about Fanatics. How has Fanatics changed licensed merchandise since they've really exploded it to 800-pound gorilla, both for better and for worse?
Before I get there, I'll plug this week's column in Sports Business Journal, which is basically,
Please.
if you were a licensee manufacturing in China, how would you feel about 145% tariff? Now, they got rolled back yesterday for 90 days, supposedly, but these guys are hurting. Now, the apparel guys had largely, I'd say, moved out, and there are other places, and they can manufacture apparel other places. But if you're, a bobblehead guy or something like that, they can't really find any other place. So that's an interesting crisis right now. In terms of Fanatics, I give Michael Rubin all the credit in the world, because that roll up, it was basically a whole bunch of family-owned businesses, or if they weren't family-owned, they were still relatively small, $7,500 million businesses at the most. The roll up was there for anyone to see. He saw it. He rolled it up. I think if I told you anyone was going to roll up that many rights into one organization, you would say, less competition. The product's going to get less creative. They might do better in terms of distribution. I think that's pretty much what's happened. Every time Fanatics rolls out, the latest championship T-shirt, I'm less than impressed. To me, it looks like a bad 8th grade art project. Now, you got to admire the roll up that he's done. And we have yet to. There's a lot of other chapters. He's gone into events. That's kind of interesting. He has undue influence at every property, and we have yet to see whether he will be a real success in gambling. But he's got that there, and he's obviously got a huge database from all his buyers. To me, the most interesting thing is, how does he apply that database, all his customers, all his licensed customers, to the other business of legal gambling? And that hasn't quite played itself out yet. But sure, it's a completely different business now, because there aren't that many. It's the probably 8,000-pound gorilla against everybody else, and there's sort of those that are with him and those that are against him. But he's got most of the rights, and he's got, as I say, he's got undue influence at every big property, and he seems to have this way of batting his eyes at Wall Street, and people throw valuations at him. I'm told his corporate bonds aren't that well rated, but his valuation from Wall Street, the last time I checked, they were over $30 billion. That's not bad, right? For a licensed product guy. So we'll see. It's also the road to, does that company ever go public or not?
Right. Now, it's been a fascinating story, no doubt about it. I think your observation there about whether because we all look at it and say, okay, they've got kind of all of these angles cornered, right, in a way, and they have this unbelievable database of people that are buying this, buying that, buying whatever. It seemed to be a natural extension, but do we know if that gambling audience is similar to the other piece?
Well, and it's obviously completely different, competing against what were family-owned companies, and the entrenched competition in casinos and legal bookmakers. You're talking about really big, really well-financed companies that you're competing with now. So it's not easy. Now, there's still 2 very big states that don't have legal gambling yet, in Texas and California. And I think the way those play out will be interesting for any company in there.
Yeah, I mean, look at ESPN. ESPN hasn't had a tremendous amount of success in the gambling business. It's, to your point, it's a tough business. But boy, you talk about the next gold rush into California when that state legalizes gambling. Bar the door, Katie.
But I mean, the politics between those that want. I mean, in California and in Texas, the politics there between no and yes. It's got to be really interesting, right?
Yeah, and look how much revenue. I mean, New York State, which is the only comparable other state, has raised, and they have the biggest tax on the books of any state in the country.
Yeah.
But I would imagine California would probably try to beat them, but we'll see.
Yeah, certainly the issue with gambling doesn't have to do with whether or not it's going to generate some revenue.
No, I think we know it. We know it will. It's just those. I mean, for any product, you get New York, Texas, California, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. All right. We know you get pitched a lot. I think the last time we had you on, we talked a little about some of the ways you handle people when they're pitching. I don't want to cover that this time, but we want to give you a chance to say what is, and I'll say this all at once. What's the worst pitch that you're willing to talk about, maybe that you've received? And then conversely, anything particularly creative that has stood out that you would love to share, whether you name names or not.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to name names, but nothing's coming to me. I think they're all tied for either last or first. How's that? Because as I said, that X and Y access with this many PR people and this many journalists going down, I think they're all pretty bad because I don't know, they all think I'm there to flog their product, and and I'm not. I'm just trying to write a story. I wish I had one that I could give to you right now, but no. I often get this. This is embargoed. You will get it at the same time as 50 other reporters, and I never say this, but I'm kind of like, wait, I worked this hard and this long so that I could tie with people? No, no, that's not it. No. So
I've had to have that discussion with you before,
and I'm like, okay, it's either me or nobody. That's easy. It should be black or white, right?
I have had to have that to some degree of that uncomfortable conversation with you before. I will readily admit it's not a fun one, but I try to be as honest and upfront
one of our
as
other
possible.
reporters was talking to me last week about being pitched semi-exclusives. And I just about jumped out the window, and I was on the 34th floor of the World Trade Center. Okay?
What do they define that as?
I don't even want to know, but I've also heard about, 2-minute exclusives because the internet's now in play. Like, no, it's like, no. If you say yes, you're reinforcing that behavior, and it's not good behavior. It's not of service to readers. I will always say no to that. But as I said, essentially it should be easier because it's either yes or no. It makes it more difficult for me because it's not go cover the bus crash. It's go cover the bus crash nobody knows about and report on that. So, okay. It just means you spend, but essentially spending more time on exclusive news is fine.
Let's talk about the media landscape in which you find yourself now, right? You talked earlier about how it's changed. Other than having, and I'm not being glib or facetious here, having a star reporter such as yourself,
right?
What has the Sports Business Journal done in recent years to remain relevant, to remain ahead of competition, to remain sort of the go-to source when there are other outlets now that are, if not directly in your space, certainly tangential to it?
Wait, there are? Okay, sorry. I think it's the basics, really. Have good reporters, follow the money. And as I said a minute ago, the worst kind of journalism is pack journalism. So refuse to be involved in the stuff everybody else is involved with. Stake out your own territory. Now, some of that comes with experience. So, a beginning reporter may not be able to do that, but you can still stake out your territory and try to, progress as something like that progresses. We've gotten more into, podcasts like yours. We've got some video productions out there. So that's another way. We have a pretty good relationship with colleges and universities, that as well as I do. That's when they form habits. So I think, we're not a cheap product. We're a premium product. Hopefully that's because it's at a premium price. Guys that run my place would love to have the zillions of eyeballs that someone like Front Office Sports has, but you know what? It's free. If we were free, we'd have zillions of eyeballs. But because they have zillions of eyeballs, they can get like a car ad or a whiskey ad just because that's the kind of ad someone at their buying company will say it takes a zillion eyeballs or million to get those clients in there. No, we're about premium product for a premium price, and it's different, but sort of that's where we staked it out, and it's we're the industry Bible, but don't get too pious about it. How's that?
I like that line.
Maybe I need to trademark that.
Are there any stories you either can tease, anything you're looking at, any subjects that you've been kind of hunting down that you can share, things that our listeners might be interested, things that SBJ readers might be interested, things that are interesting you that you want to keep chasing?
I think that the private equity thing is beyond huge, and I kind of pushed us in the direction of private equity being, the executive of the year, pretty much, or the most influential, because to me that was the biggest story, and we ended up not doing a specific person. It was sort of the private equity investor at the end of last year. That much money coming into the industry is stunning to me, and we continue to follow that. Look at the influence they have and will have. Look at the restrictions in terms of owning properties. How much will they change? The NFL's already changed. Some of the others preceded them. So I think that's a really interesting one. I think what is often not stated is that private equity is buying up everything, not just sports. I mean, I was on a plane some weeks ago. I sat next to some, I think they were skin doctors, and they were talking about how their business is being bought up by private equity. My plumber's telling me how that business is being bought up by private equity. There's no business that's not being bought up by private equity, as far as I know. And at some point, these guys are in it to flip it. They like getting a return, but they're also usually it's 4 to 5 years you want to flip it. So I'm kind of wondering, what happens when all of them want to flip it at the same time or close to the same time? That seems interesting. Sort of connected to that is the Middle Eastern money coming out. You'll watch the playoffs. You see, like the Knicks have with the Abu Dhabi patch. I mean, that wasn't that acceptable, either the patch nor Middle Eastern money. That's pretty recent. So I mean, logical progression. When will a Saudi or UAE investor own a U.S. team, and will that be acceptable? And how big will their sports infrastructure get over there? I mean, they'll have the World Cup soon enough, right? But that kind of influence will be really interesting over here, and what's acceptable and what's not. And as you know, David, that's really coming to a head in the golf world.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's unbelievable, because you and I talked about that for the story that you were doing, and I think one of the most unbelievable developments in this story, particularly on the Middle Eastern money, was PIF actually taking the name and taking an entitlement with WTA versus one of their portfolio companies or brands that they may own that are involved in tons of sport. Aramco stands out in particular, say. And now I'm wondering, obviously, Abu Dhabi, that's coming from Abu Dhabi's wealth fund. We know how active the other countries are. McLaren is owned outright by Bahrain Sovereign Wealth Fund. Those wealth funds and their names of those wealth funds, in the case of the Saudis, PIF, will be actually on the name versus just one of their brands. That to me was a huge development in where things are going.
Oh, and by the way, we talked about, the media thing it's difficult to read, at least yet. And I think it's because of this. The biggest sports assets just keep getting more expensive all the time. I mean, what did the Celtics go for? $6.1 billion without an arena.
Without an
arena. And I think the Clippers went for what, 2 without an arena.
Well, they didn't have an arena, but they have a much better cash position with their arena. I think it went for 4.
Better deal.
But the fact that the Celtics went for more than the Commanders was unbelievable to us, and we chatted about that quite a bit a few episodes ago.
Yeah, and think about the fact that when Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers, everybody was saying how much he had overpaid, and now it looks like a great bargain.
Pardon me, I was thinking the Suns.
I said that, and I will say now, every owner in every sport, minor league on up, should be kissing his ass, because he was responsible for a lot of that inflation.
Yep.
I had it wrong. You said Clippers. I was thinking Suns, because the Suns, I think, were the ones that got it before. My bad. Yeah.
But that one was fairly stunning, and supposedly F1's for sale, right? So that seems like something one of those Middle Eastern countries might buy if it is indeed for sale. Okay. So what's that asset worth? I mean, if you could buy a tailpipe in that sport, it would cost you $100 million, right, David? So.
Well, their tailpipes are very, very high tech.
Well, it's a whole other level. A baseball cap costs $80 in that sport, doesn't it?
No comment. Not yet.
We could go on forever.
What else?
At least a lot longer.
What
you tell us.
There was something else that was intriguing. Hold on. Oh, you asked about things that bother me, right?
Yes,
sure.
We're always interested in what bothers you.
Right.
The airing of the grievances.
Yeah, there's a new development in terms of things that I can gripe about, and logically, of course, I think it's from the PR side of things, that people have started to call presenting sponsorships title sponsorships. Now we know the difference between presenting and title, right?
Yeah.
Title you're first, presenting you're second. But there's a new school of illogic that goes, if it's in the title, if it's on the line, it is therefore a presenting sponsor, it's therefore a title sponsorship, and we will call it a title sponsorship. I don't have much problem telling the difference between presenting and title, but this is creeping into the lexicon, and it's probably the same people that forced out sponsorship and started calling it partnership, which is the other thing that bothers me to death.
Okay, Terry, let's go ahead and please give us your definition as to why you don't consider them partnerships.
I would need to see shared equity and risk on both sides to consider it a partnership. And often that is not the case, probably most of the time.
I used to say it a lot more ineloquently than Terry just did when I was at AT&T and people would pitch us on a partnership. I said, until the checks start going in two directions, we are not partners.
It's so true. And I mean, I wrote the column where I said, I've lost this battle. There are partnership departments. There are partnership classes at universities. I've lost this battle, but I'm still never calling it a partnership unless I see some shared risk and equity. And I haven't seen that. So.
Nor will we.
Yeah, the name and title or title where it is in front of the name of the event. That's the clear title sponsorship. Now, I guess someone can come up with the long version of the name and title sponsorship or something like that. But yeah,
to call it a title when the name comes second, I don't really.
And after presented by, and
but it's been creeping. I'm telling you, that's starting to happen. Like, and you know,
what end though? To what end? What do they think they're accomplishing? You can call. You can call
perception reality.
Terry talked about it earlier, Tim, when he talked about deals still getting done for maybe not the perfect strategic reasons. And it sounds right. You're in a title and you're going to talk to your board that may not have been through this. And it's hey, we're in the title sponsorship, along with another brand probably that actually is in front of that. So that should raise some red flags.
Well, another one of my old hard and fast rules is if you have to point out the synergy in a deal, it's not there. It should be readily apparent, or throw that word out.
Ooh.
Right? These are all basics. Simplicity in marketing. After all these years, I've grown to love simplicity in marketing. So you asked me about trends and stuff. I wrote maybe a month or so ago about the Atlantic League, which is a single A unaffiliated league. And what did they do that was simple but wonderful? They put a QR code on their baseballs. I just think, and surprisingly, no one had ever done that. So, I mean, they leave it up to the teams what to do with it, whether it's a free hot dog or send you to their website or take you to the sponsor's website, whatever. But I just thought, you know what? That's really good. And it doesn't cost you anything. How come everybody doesn't do that? So I would expect them to get copied ad nauseum on that one.
That is brilliant.
Isn't that good? Simple is better.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Simple is better. So I don't have that many hard and fast rules, but that's one of them.
Okay. All right.
My only other one is causality is always complex. My job forces you into a box where you want to say A is caused by Z. A is caused by B. Usually A is caused by B through Z. You just kind of don't get there. So if you start out with the notion that causality is complex, maybe you can at least think down the line a little bit. But rarely is A caused by B. There's more factors involved, I guess.
Very true. Very true. Terry, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for being our first repeat guest. I will go out on a limb and say you'll eventually be our first 3-time guest. Can't say when right now.
I think there's a T-shirt in there somewhere, isn't there?
Yes, there will definitely be a T-shirt by then. We're talking.
You've got an extensive line of licensed goods by now, don't you?
Yeah. We are working on that.
Have you done anything in terms of sponsors or anything like that, guys?
Well, that's part of the big strategic powwow that David and I are going to have tomorrow, and figure out how do we take this thing to the next level, because quite honestly, we are a gem. And we are just not recognized by as many people as a gem as we should be.
Well, you're recognized by me as a gem. I don't know, but you're a
Thank
gem
you.
among your small group of 6 followers, right?
Well, we have a few more than that. We might have to give him the Gary Placino treatment now.
Gary Placino, who was our first guest, referred to us as a little podcast.
We didn't.
Yeah, and
He was
so
a
there's
little
a
podcast.
reason.
We decided to get real pugnacious about it too.
Yeah, so there's a reason why he
was
didn't
not
come back.
the first repeat guest.
Exactly.
Correct.
Well, listen, we
No,
do get a
apparently
lot of great feedback from people that reach out to us, whether they're people pitching or whether they're people that we just chat to in the industry, which is kind of fun. And we do have a good time doing it, and we think we have something kind of cool here.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
we amuse ourselves if no one else.
Someone's got to laugh at your jokes. It might as well be you.
That's right. Because my wife's not going to laugh at all of them. The ones she does, and I have David. Terry, we can't thank you enough for coming on. I know you got
Again,
some
I'm
travel coming.
Anytime.
You got some travel coming up this week. Safe travels. Look forward to seeing you next and upcoming articles.
Thanks a lot, Terry.
My pleasure, guys.
Again, a huge thanks to our mutual friend, Terry Lefton, who really has been such an important resource to so many of us in this industry over a pretty long time. Coming up to the end of the show, time for shout outs and to take a look ahead to see what we may be looking out for in the next few weeks. So we'll turn it over to you, Tim. What do you have your eye on?
So looking forward, Cornell, after a slow start last night, handily defeated University of Albany in the first round of the NCAA playoffs. They now go on to play the Richmond Spiders in the quarterfinals this coming Saturday out at Hofstra. There's some great lacrosse still to be played. So if anybody is a college lacrosse fan, the next 2 weekends are certainly right up your alley. Cornell has not won a national championship since 1977. They have lost in the finals, made several Final Fours. This feels like this might be their year. I don't want to jinx it, but I'll be watching and may even try to get out to Hofstra this weekend. But before I hand it back over to you, a couple of weeks ago, the industry lost a truly kind person. Doug Perney was a longtime executive at IMG. Anybody who came through the halls of IMG got to work with Doug, and I think would agree with me that he was one of the nicest people you would ever meet. He was very rarely front and center, but was an invaluable asset to both the employees of IMG and their clients. The outpouring of people in some of the LinkedIn posts I made was really nice to see. The last time I saw Doug, he was a docent at the Museum of Natural History, and he took my kids and my wife and I on a tour, a special tour of the museum, and he treated them as if they were visiting dignitaries. So he will be sorely missed.
The tributes have been unbelievable. I feel bad that I didn't know him, but everything that has been said by you and so many others has been just unbelievable to see. And obviously, I knew him by reputation. Of course, when you're in this industry, you don't miss that. But obviously, a very impressive and well-lived and well-respected life. A couple things, and I want to. There's a subject that I think we need to keep an eye on. I do want to give a shout out to the Catholic Church's new Pope, Pope Leo, who is actually Robert Francis Prevost from Dolton, Illinois, who after Francis passing, and for those of you that followed, Pope Francis was quite a big sports fan himself, heralded by Thomas Bach for his support of the Olympic movement, a big fan of San Lorenzo in Argentina's premier division, and a supporter of the Special Olympics as well. But Leo is from Chicago, baby. And while I thought it was funny, and he went to Villanova, so big connections to me because I grew up right by Villanova and I'm a big Villanova fan. And he's a Chicago sports fan. It was funny because right out of the gate, it looked like the Cubs were trying to claim him, but he was clearly a White Sox fan. I even have pictures of him when the White Sox won the World Series. But hopefully he brings some good vibe to the Bears as well, because the memes coming out of Chicago have just been unbelievable. So congrats, and exciting about, and the first U.S.-based American Pope. I mean, pretty amazing.
Pretty cool.
I think we need to talk a little about the commission that has been formed by President Trump, that is going to be co-chaired by former Alabama coach Nick Saban, current ESPN analyst, and also by a Texas Tech University Board of Regents chair, Cody Campbell. We try not to go into politics on this, but it seems at every turn this administration wants to be involved in the big stories. NIL is a big story. I think you and I both agree it needs some fixing. It needs some regulation. We've talked about it with guests. We've talked about it just the two of us. This seems to be, at least from what I can tell with these two picks as co-chairs, seems to make it a little one-sided as to what it's going to mean for NIL. I don't see representation from the player side at all. And it seems to me that the forces that are chairing this thing would have an interest in certain schools being able to pay a lot while others are having to face new regulation. That's my sense coming out of what I'm seeing. Obviously, we'll wait to see what happens, I suppose. But this doesn't look like a particularly balanced commission. If those are the two co-chairs.
I think we could probably do a whole episode on this in the coming months as this thing takes shape. I wouldn't be surprised if it's much ado about nothing, quite frankly, that there's a big announcement and then very little work product comes out of this commission. I do respect Coach Saban. I think he would add tremendous value to this conversation, but to your point, it would have to include voices from the student athlete side. I mean, why not reach out to somebody like Ed O'Bannon, who got this whole thing started, and have him become involved? Or a Livy Dunn, who is, earned millions of dollars in NIL money and has helped her teammates and fellow student athletes at LSU, to commercialize their own name, image, and likeness. I mean, there's no shortage of people that could have been added to speak to the needs of the student athlete, which they just haven't done.
And we'll see how they build out the commission. I agree with you. Let's take this up. It's just a story that I think we're going to want to be following for sure. One other thing, PGA Championship is this weekend. Do you want to venture a guess, since we tend to like to make predictions on
Morikawa?
You're going Morikawa this, and I'm going to go Rory.
Okay.
I'm going to say Rory's going to win the first two. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's the first time
I hope you're
Rory.
right.
Anyway, it's always fun to pick.
To my head.
All right, I guess that's a wrap. Listen, always fun visiting with Terry, and definitely think he needs to be a regular, as we discussed on that. It would be great to get his opinions and insights here every once in a while on the show. Listen, thank you all for spending some time with us. Very, very much appreciated. We believe that any engagement is good engagement. I think we'll say it that way. So be sure to check us out on TikTok. Don't try to say, any of you listeners out there, that you're not on TikTok yet. We know you're scrolling on TikTok, so check us out over there. Instagram, and of course on LinkedIn, and would very much appreciate you subscribing to us on YouTube, our YouTube channel, where we're posting as quickly as possible full video versions of the podcast. And of course, we're still there on Apple and Spotify. So listen, register, sign up for us there, comment for us there. Rank us there, or give us ratings. All of that stuff is important, and as I said, very much appreciated. So that's it. Until next time, I'm DP, he's McGee, and we'll talk soon.